Hello, I'm Sean, and I'm going to be talking about drugs. So who here likes drugs? I know I do. I did some right in that chair over there, actually, right before I came up here. I did some caffeine. So in all seriousness, enforcing strict drug regulations actually does more harm than good. And my claim is that legalizing drugs would substantially benefit the United States. All drugs. And this would do this for 3 reasons. Legalizing drugs would save a lot of government revenue, the decriminalization of drugs would massively reduce crime, and the current drug enforcements are failing and fundamentally racist. Starting with my first secondary claim, legalizing drugs would save government revenue. Government spending would be retained according to Professor Dr. Blodgett from Harvard in the article All Drugs Should Be Legalized Immediately. Giving statistics by Dr. Blodgett, legalizing drugs would save $41 billion in government expenditure, and of these savings, $25 billion would accrue or trickle down to local and state governments, while $15 billion would accrue to federal governments. So they could spend that money on much more important things than arresting people for drugs all the time. And more tax revenue would be redirected to the federal budget. In another article called Study Claims Drug Legalization Could Save Money, statistics reveal that the legalization of drugs would generate tax revenues of about $46.7 billion. On to my second secondary claim. The decriminalization of drugs would reduce crime massively. Jamie Doward, in her article, Legal Marijuana Cuts Violence, says U.S. study, statistics reveal that in the United States, in states that have legalized marijuana, violent crimes have dropped up to 13%. So with marijuana as example for future legalized drugs, crime is sure to fall, especially violent crime. My last secondary claim is simply that current drug enforcements are failing because they're racist and they just simply do not work. Despite drugs being illegal, people still use. $40 billion is spent on drug enforcement every year, and there's still people doing drugs everywhere. The war on drugs mainly targets people of color and is a fundamentally racist system. According to drugpolicy.org, 80% of people in federal prison, while 60% of people in state prison under drug charges are black or Latino. The racial targeting inhibits their ability to succeed. Once again, looking at drugpolicy.org, 1 in 13 people are denied the right to vote due to laws that disenfranchise those with felonies. So in conclusion, the current drug enforcement system is racist, wasting money, and simply isn't effective. The United States would be much better off if all drugs were legalized.
All right, the proposition, it sounds like you've got 2 propositions at the beginning of the speech. That's a little bit problematic. You do preview what the secondary structure is, so that's easy to follow. And the controversy on this, I think, is pretty straightforward, so we're okay there. You signpost the supporting points in the body of the speech. That's okay. Whether or not the proof is sufficient, I think, is one of the big problems with the speech. There's one set of statistics that comes from the one source that talks about likely tax revenues that are going to result from legalization, and that's about it on that first point. So you're talking about billions of dollars that is going to be collected as a consequence. There are, of course, larger implications for drug policy, and I'm sure that the Drug Policy Institute probably considers some of those things, like what the economic costs of legalization would be when there's increased use and health consequences that accrue as a result of that legalization. So there's going to have to be some on-balance assessment here, and we don't really get much of that. We're just looking at one aspect of the equation here, and I think that that's going to be probably a vulnerability, and you only have the one source who comes up with these estimates about what the amount of money would be there. The crime argument is based on an inference based on a decline in crimes in states that legalized marijuana, and that's there's causality being assumed because of a statistical correlation that's going on there, and I don't know that causality is going to be established that way. By the way, I don't know that it declined significantly more in those states than it did in other states, so that would be something that would make that argument a little bit stronger. It's not that there isn't some evidence here, it's just that there's not much evidence here. I think you need a little bit more, and it's a little skimpy, as they say. This sort of like you've built the bone structure for the argument, but you need to put some sinew and muscle and fat on it to make it a little bit more animated and real as an issue. As it is, it feels like it's a first run through, and it needs some detail on it. And then the third point, we heard some of the same sort of statistical information presented in an earlier speech. The notion that the criminal justice system is failing as a result of the racism that's going on there. There's some talking points in here. The information on this is a little bit thin, and again, it's the Drug Policy Institute probably has some better explanations than what you presented here. You've given us the thumbnail sketch on that. So it's not like your information is bad, it just feels like it's not necessarily sufficient or convincing. You do a reasonable job presenting the information. I kind of like the opening that you had, got people's attention, but it is kind of a diversionary tactic that's going on there, and you use less than half the time that you had, so there's plenty of room for additional information to support your points. All right, thank you.